So this is my video on the Prizefighter tournament from last Thursday at York Hall. Sorry it's taken me a few days to get this one up. I've been struggling with a bit of a cold and didn't want to do a long video and put the listeners through that. Just a sort of quick word, it was obviously 8-man heavyweight format as per usual. As many will know, Michael Sprott won the tournament, a very popular winner, came back and won it for the second time. He's a very popular guy in British boxing, so everyone was very, very pleased for him. But I just thought I'd do a breakdown of the fights, rattle through them, 1 or 2 minutes on each one, and maybe a bit of an analysis on where the fighters go from here. First fight was Larry Alabamo versus Jason Gaverne. Very disappointing fight in my opinion. I scored the fight 29-27 to Gaverne. One of the judges agreed with me, 2 at it 29-28 to Gaverne. Basically, Alabamo looked by far the better, more dangerous man. Where he got let down is his complete lack of technical ability. Very robotic. He had no sort of spring or anything to his jab or his work. It was very, very sort of mechanical. His footwork wasn't good. Basically got hit in the first round by a very cuffing shot. It was the first time Gaverne threw a real punch, just clipped him. Wouldn't have even knocked me down the shot, to be honest. But yeah, it was a really sort of weak cuffing shot. Alabamo got his feet in a total mess. Basically, the shot just tipped him over. He got knocked down by a really sort of weak punch, and that kind of put him on the back foot. Because obviously, with the Prizefighter format being 3 rounds, he realised he basically needed a knockout. If he just 10-9 the other 2 rounds, it would have only been a draw. So yeah, it put him on the back foot straight away. He chased it, worked his way back into the fight in the second round, and in the third fight just got sort of outscaled by a more experienced opponent. He looked very raw. He's never going to be a sort of smooth technical fighter. The inactivity probably didn't help him with that, but very, very weak sort of footwork, very robotic. And, with losses now to sort of real journeyman types in his record like Gaverne and McDermott, it's hard to see how Alabamo comes back from here. I mean, I know he's relatively fresh in terms of the number of fights he's had, but he's not a young man, and I doubt there's a huge amount of improvement to come out of him. So Gaverne went into the second round. Second fight, James Toney versus Matt Legg. Toney did quite well in this fight, actually. I know it was only against a sort of a lesser known opponent, but Toney dominated the first round. Matt Legg showed him a lot of respect, and Toney sort of dominated it. Obviously, Toney, I'm not going to say he's anything like his top form. It's not like that James Toney was back or anything, but against inferior opposition, he showed that he still had a bit of something. Excellent head movement, very elusive, very good technically. He sort of won the first round very comfortably. Matt Legg, I scored the fight second round to Toney as well, but Matt Legg certainly came into the fight. Second round was just a bit busier. Don't know if his trainer put a rocket up his arse going into the third round, but James Toney decided to turn it on. Got Legg out of there straight away in the third round. As soon as Toney put on the presser, blew Legg out. Referee stopped it. Arguably a bit of a premature stop heads, but it would have gone the same way very shortly, I'm sure. So Toney went marching on to the second round to meet Jason Gaverne. Where does Matt Legg go from here? Well, I believe he's 37. Obviously no shame in losing to James Toney, but yeah, it's going to be difficult for him. Maybe a fight with Larry Alabamo is going to be difficult for both of them. So maybe the 2 of those guys could meet up. But yeah, Toney and Gaverne were going to be the first semi-final. Interesting match at that one. Obviously, both very experienced Americans. Gaverne has served as a sparring partner for Toney in the past, so they know each other fairly well. I expected Toney to win with quite a bit in hand. I was not impressed by his performance against Matt Legg. So after all, it was against a lesser known opponent, and if Toney was at 10-15% of his best, he was going to win it. But he showed that he still had something, and he showed that he turned up to win. So yeah, I was quite impressed by Toney. I'm disappointed by Alabamo really. That was my thoughts going into the second half of the quarterfinals. Next fight was Damien Wills versus Michael Sprott, and I've got to say a very disappointing performance from Damien Wills. Damien Wills came out, dominated the first round. I thought he looked really, really good. His shot seemed to have a huge amount of weight, but it would do, I guess, because he was best part of 19 stone. He looked very big, Wills, but heavy shots, big power. low work rate, but I thought he was going to get sprott out of there. He just looked like he had a lot of danger in his punches, and I certainly scored the first round to Damien Wills, but maybe it's because he was carrying too much weight, maybe it's inactivity, I'm not sure. He'd had something like 1 round in the last couple of years, but allowed himself to get completely outworked in the second and third rounds. Sprott established his jab. I think Sprott won the last 2 based purely on activity. I scored the fight 29-28. 2 of the judges agreed with me. One of them scored it 30-28 to Sprott. I don't know how they didn't give Wills the first round, but very, very disappointing from Wills. He's got a decent record. He looked really, really solid in the first round. After the first round, I thought he was a likely tournament winner. Very, very disappointed how he'd worked himself out of the fight. Maybe it's fitness, maybe it's weight, maybe it's inactivity. It's hard to see where he goes from here, unless he changes tact in training or something. Very difficult. But Michael Sprott, fitter man, more activity. Obviously very familiar with the Prizefighter format, having won it before and competed in it twice. Very experienced, and he showed a bit of something when he got his jab working. As I say, I thought he was outclassed in the first round, but he kept in the fight, kept his jab up, and yeah, I was pleased for him getting through. He well earned from Michael Sprott. So Sprott obviously goes marching on to the semi-final, and then the final fight of the quarters, probably the best quarter-final, was Tom Little versus Brian Minto. I scored the fight 30-27 to Minto. This was perhaps the hardest one to call. 2 of the judges scored it 29-28 to Minto. 1 scored it 29-28 to Little. Quite a few commentators were saying Little won the fight. I thought Little was quite impressive actually. He's a massive man, decent jab, decent hand speed, decent technically. Minto looked very small in comparison to him. What got Minto through this fight was his experience. This was only Tom Little's 5th fight. It was his first fight for about 18 months. And Minto kept very busy, got inside, totally negated Little's advantages. Little, his advantages were his big jab, his height advantage, but his inexperience showed, and he allowed Minto to get on his chest and dominate. I think there's a lot for Little to take out of this. He could be a decent fighter. He hasn't been protected. He's, he could have easily be someone who'd got to 8-0, 9-0, but he hasn't taken the easy route up. He's now with Don Charles. He looks a lot fitter than he looked last year. Last time he got knocked out by not Richard Towers, by what's his name? By the fighter Ian Lewison took out recently. Tom Dallas, that's it. Yeah, he got taken out by Tom Dallas. He's beating Dallas, but ran out of fitness, got fatigued, and yeah, it's going to be. He's improved a lot. He looked decent technically. Obviously, Don Charles working his magic. He looked like he'd been fitter. I think he's still a young man. There's a chance for Tom Little to do something in boxing. He looked worlds better than someone like Larry Olabamo, for example. And I think if Tom Little stays active, keeps getting fit, loses a bit more weight, stays with Don Charles, I could definitely see him in with the likes of Skelton, McDermott, maybe even Michael Sprott. I think he looked like a decent prospect, and he hasn't taken the easy way up. And I think, enough respect to Tom Little really. But Minto went through. I think his work rate, his come forward style, and his experience really showed, and I was quite impressed with Minto really. So we went on to the semi-finals. The first one was James Toney versus Jason Gaverne. This was the most disappointing fight of the night. I scored it a shutout, 30-27 to Gaverne. Judges, one of them scored it a draw, 2 of them scored it 29-28 to Gaverne. I gave it. Toney was definitely landing the classier work, but he was so inactive, starting to look his age. He tried to turn it on again like he'd done with leg, but there wasn't enough gas left in the tank, and Gaverne just outworked him. I know Toney isn't what he used to be, but I thought there was still something decent left in him, and the fact that he's getting beaten by someone like Gaverne, who's an out-and-out journeyman, as I said, served as a sparring partner for Toney, really tells us that it's time to call it a day. I mean, Toney is a great defensive fighter, but Toney was getting hit a lot. He was rocked on occasions during this fight as a 3-rounder against a journeyman, and make no mistake about it, if James Toney decides to keep on fighting, you know, he's had something like 90 fights and never been stopped. He's a great defensive fighter with his head movement, how he rolls with shots, but we're very close. You know, I think next fight James Toney's in, he'll get stopped. He's gone down a lot, even in the last year or two, and you know, the punishment he was taking from Gavern, he will get stopped and stopped badly. You know, if someone like Anthony Joshua, David Price, one of these guys took a fight against him, you know, on their way back, or, you know, Price wanted an easy warm-up fight against the name, or they wanted to step Joshua up, something like that, he will get knocked out badly, Toney. Like, he's taking multiple shots. He's getting rocked by Gavern, who's not a massive puncher. Like, this really is time to call it a day. I mean, I really thought Toney might win this. I thought, even though he's nowhere near what he used to be, he'd still have the class to get through. But the fact he's getting beaten by Gavern, that's really disappointing, really. And it's time to call it a day, I think, for Toney. I think, you know, he will get stopped, and no one wants to see that, really. So the second one was Michael Sprott versus Brian Minto. Close fight, good fight. I scored the fight 29-28 to Sprott. The unanimous decision, all judges agreed with me, 29-28. First round, Sprott absolutely dominated. Really good jab. Really good jab. Comfortable round for Sprott. Dominated the fight with a good jab. Really showed a bit of class. You know, we forget, I know Sprott's been used as an opponent and used as a sparring partner, but he's a decent fighter on his day, Sprott. And, you know, you got the jab working, and he's a solid British level fighter. Totally ruined Minto's game. His experience of the format and just in general came through in the first round. Minto came out like a bulldog in the second round, got on his chest, you know, that come forward style, relentlessly coming forward, relentlessly aggressive. You know, very, very dominant round for Minto. I thought Sprott was going to lose. I thought Minto could either stop him or, you know, Sprott had just given up. But somehow Sprott found a bit more in the third round and got the jab going again. It's a bit of a brawl, bit of a tough round, bit of a scrappy round, but Michael Sprott had the cleaner work, and it was really his jab that got him through this fight. You know, really decent. What impressed me about Sprott is, in all three, as I say, he's won the tournament, and in all three fights of his, you know, in all three fights, I scored a round to his opponent. You know, but his experience, his jab, his knowledge of the format, and his, you know, his heart really to keep coming forward, keep fighting, won him this tournament. I was really impressed by the way he won the third round. I thought it was game over in the second when Minto had him up against the ropes. But, yep, Sprott, knowledge of the format, experience of the format, great jab, that really won him today. So the final was Jason Gavern versus Michael Sprott. Gavern had a slight advantage in the sense that he'd fought first, so had a longer time to break, but Anthony Joshua was on next, so both guys had 45 minutes or so to, you know, to have a bit of a rest. The final, again, Sprott wins the first round comfortably in my book. Very, very good jab, dominating the early minutes. Gavern, he seemed to be relatively fit. He didn't look like he was in great shape, but he seemed relatively fit. He worked his way into the fight in the first round, and whilst I gave it to Sprott because of his early work and early use of the jab, Gavern did decent and certainly came into the fight towards the end of it. Second round, I scored to Gavern, and again, it was very similar to the Minto round. He really won that round quite comfortably, I felt, and I thought it was, you know, Sprott was going to lose it again. In the third round, Sprott came out, again, found a little bit more. I don't know where he found it from. Got a jab going, won the fight. I should say, Gavern seemed to sustain quite a nasty injury. He was fighting with just his jab, didn't seem to have a right hand at all. I don't know if it's an elbow or a shoulder or whatever it was, but yeah, maybe things would have been different if Gavern hadn't picked that up, but it is what it is. Sprott won. As I say, in all three fights for Sprott, I scored one round to his opponent. All three fights he looked in trouble at stages, but he came through. His jab was decent throughout the night. His jab was the best, you know, best factor of the night, really, and he looked really, really good. So in terms of who I'm taking away from this, really, it's, funnily enough, it's Tom Little and Michael Sprott. I think Tom Little showed enough to suggest he's got a bit of potential if he's looked after by Don Charles. I like Michael Sprott. You know, he's obviously Sprott. It's all about levels, and Sprott is, you know, a fighter at a certain level. But hopefully he'll get a big fight out of this. You know, I'd like to see I wouldn't actually like to see Sprott versus Price. I think Price would probably knock him sparked out in the first round or second round, and I don't really want to see that happening to Sprott. But I know Sprott wants a big payday, so maybe Price versus Sprott is, you know, something that will deliver him, and certainly winning Prizefighter, he puts himself back in that mix. You know, Hughie Fury's an option. Is Anthony Joshua even an option? Maybe David Price is certainly an option. Price wants a, you know, winnable fight before he gets back into real opposition, maybe against Chisora later in the year. So, you know, it's going to be a real interesting to see where he turns up next. And I certainly think, you know, maybe even Sprotty and Lewison. There's fights out there for Sprott, and hopefully he can pick up a decent payday. And yeah. Afterwards, I think on IFL TV, he said that he'd like to end it with a fight with the Klitschko's. You know, that isn't going to happen. But I'd like to see Sprott fight again in Britain for a decent payday against the name, rather than just going out to Germany getting beaten up by another one of the Sauerland prospects, really. So, well done, Sprott. Really pleased that he's won. Really pleased that he's picked up a bit of prize money. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Hopefully he'll get another payday or two off the back of it. He says he's going to call it a day in a year or two. Hopefully he does. Hopefully we're not still talking about Michael Sprott in 5-6 years. You know, he's a decent fighter, Sprott, and hopefully he goes out on a decent win like this, rather than getting beaten to a pulp for 3 or 4 years like Danny Williams, for example. Dare I say it? The other thing I read on Twitter was maybe Audley Harrison Sprott. It's a winnable fight for both, I guess. So maybe it could happen. There'd be interest in it. I know there'd be a lot of complaints about it. People would turn in to watch it, I can guarantee that. So, few options for Sprott, but all in all, whilst I was pleased for Sprott, I thought it was quite a disappointing Prizefighter. You know, the Brits didn't do well. You know, 3 of the Brits didn't get out of the first round, and I think the American experience, you know, their guys were journeymen very much, but the American experience beat the British potential. And it was a day for the experienced fighters rather than the prospects. And the fact that Michael Sprott won it, and no disrespect to Michael Sprott, because I absolutely love him, but the fact that he won it showed that it was quite a low standard competition, because Sprott is a guy who's, you know, had a lot of losses, as is Jason Gavern, and you know, the fact that those two blokes were slugging it out in the final with something like 30 losses between them showed that it wasn't the greatest competition. You know, if Toney had won it, or Minto had won it, or Alabama had won it, or Little had won it, we could at least say maybe someone decent has come out and performed. But the fact that the final was contested by 2 fighters who'd lost so many times, and yeah, it wasn't the greatest Prizefighter. But props to Sprott. Really pleased he won. Hopefully he'll get a decent fight out of it. As I say, like, in a way I hope he gets prize, because it would be a good fight for him, but I wouldn't fancy him in that fight, and I don't want him to get too badly hurt, so in a way I hope it doesn't happen. But please leave your comments below. What were your thoughts on the fight? You know, where do you see Sprott going next? Do you agree with me about Tom Little? What are your thoughts on James Toney? Keen to hear a few opinions. Going to do a few more videos later today. Got the Gale fight I want to do a little video on. Andre Ward fight. Wanted to do a video on David Price. Also wanted to do a video on the Hennessy Sports Fighters. I think there's some interesting discussion points there. So keep tuned into my channel in the next 24 hours. Maybe subscribe, and I will get some more opinions coming up shortly. Thanks very much.